What's up, YouTube? I know it's been a minute. Some might even say that that chip from the last video actually killed me. It's just a rumor. I'm back. I've actually been really busy with family, just haven't had time to edit videos, but we're going to try to get back into the swing of things. In fact, there is going to be a meetup at Capital Casino in Sacramento with the likes of KNPoker, Doug McCusker, as well as Andrew Lok. I'm going to be joining them, and there will be a couple of other vloggers that are coming into the mix. So please join us on July 24th, starting at 2 p.m. I hope to see you guys there, and let's get into those hand histories.
All right, jumping right back into the action, we are here at Lucky Chances Casino in Colma, California, right by the San Francisco airport. My first hand in the small blind. I guess that would make it my second hand, actually. I have ace-7 of clubs. There is an open to $20 under the gun. He gets 3 callers, and I just find that this is going to be a pretty good spot to squeeze. Having the ace in my hands means it's less likely that I'm going to be facing some of the strongest hands, such as aces, ace-king, and ace-queen. And also, given the fact that nobody else decided to 3-bet him, I don't expect anybody else to be particularly strong here. I make it $160, and much to my surprise, the big blind snap calls, leaving himself with about $650. This I didn't expect, but he's been doing a lot of really interesting things against me lately that lead me to believe he's just trying to beat me in a pot really bad. The original raiser tanks for a bit and eventually decides to fold. He's obviously the one that we were most scared about, having the strongest range. Now the first caller calls, leaving himself with about $320. I have absolutely no idea what sorts of hands he's going to be doing this with. Now the next guy, who's an old man coffee, does what old man coffees do and folds. And now the button calls as well with about a $700 stack behind. He's a known gambler. I expect ranges here to be fairly wide. As I said, I'm obviously scared of the big blind's flat call, but given what I've seen from him a lot lately, I really just have absolutely no idea what any of these guys have. The purpose of the squeeze here was obviously to steal his preflop or possibly get one caller and try to play a heads-up pot. Now that we're going 4 ways, I'm going to be treading pretty lightly on various boards unless I flop something with decent equity. The flop ends up coming Jack 10-3 rainbow, not a club in sight. After tanking for a bit, I just feel like there's really no point in me betting this flop. I expect there to be some hands here like pocket jacks, pocket tens, maybe even pocket queens flatting from the big blind. And I just find that it's going to be pretty hard to get anybody to give up here. I end up checking, the big blind checks, and sure enough, the first caller ships it in there pretty quickly for his like $335. The button calls fairly quickly, obviously flopping no pair, no draw, just absolutely no equity. There's really nothing here I can do. So I end up folding. With the action now on the big blind, I start to think about what sorts of hands I expect people to show up with here. Again, I do think there are going to be some sets like pocket jacks or pocket tens. I do expect that, again, there are going to be hands like king queen suited, maybe even queen 9 suited, 9-8 suited for the open enders. There are various amounts of draws, and that's one of the reasons why I think I just can't be c-betting into the field here. After some thought, the big blind says that, it's time to gamble. He jams it all in there for about $650. The action is now back on the button, who has him covered. He goes into the tank, asks the dealer for a count. It's a little over $300 more. I can't expect he's ever going to be finding a fold here. If he has a draw, he's getting great odds and has to call. If he has top pair, he's just always going to have to call. There are, like I said, a number of draws here, and I would expect that if the big blind had 2 pair or a set, he'd be jamming it in much quicker. So once the button is told that it's a little over $300 more, he does eventually make the call. So here we are in a massive 3-way all-in, a giant mess that I myself created when I decided to get a little wild and crazy with the ace-7 suited out of the small blind. I have to be honest, I didn't expect to be getting this much action. The games recently have been fairly tight with a lot of regulars and grinders who just haven't been getting particularly out of line. One of the main reasons why I decided to squeeze here, but here we are. Once the player on the button makes the call, the dealer eventually puts out the turn, which is a king, obviously completing a bunch of draws. The river is now a deuce, and the original player who jammed the flop ends up showing pocket deuces. That's right, he jammed that flop with pocket 2s, 4 ways. I have no idea what exactly he thinks he's going to be getting this hand through with, but kudos to him, he rivers the set. Now the player that jammed folds as well when the button shows queen jack for the flop top pair, turned open ender. Obviously he gets extremely unlucky. This hand is just really, really wild. I have no idea what's going on. The big blind ends up showing a 3, so he flopped bottom pair. I assume he had ace-3 suited, maybe bottom pair in the backdoor flush draw. Yeah, just really, really crazy. The deuces gets particularly lucky here. He ends up making some speech afterwards saying about how he's been running bad lately. Yeah, if you're going to be jamming deuces multi-way on this sort of board, I don't know exactly what you're expecting. His jam here for $330 represents about a half pot bet, and in a 3-bet 4-way situation, I just really don't like it, especially given the flop comes Jack 10 high. As I stated before, there are a myriad of draws that are just never going to be folding, some top pairs and even second pairs that are just going to call, trying to get quote-unquote lucky. And if we do get called, I think it's just very likely that we're going to be in a situation where we have to fade the deck or just have a 2-outer. I'd much rather be getting it in here with something that has more outs. And just because I've checked, it doesn't mean that I just don't have anything. And similarly with the big blind checking, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything. His reasoning for jamming, he said, was he just thought he had to get through the button. But as we can see here, I ended up folding, and the big blind still ended up calling with a 3, which would have had him in really bad shape. So I think if he's going to be jamming here, he should be doing it something with a little bit more high equity. And also his preflop call is pretty suspect. He's calling off a third of his stack with pocket deuces, trying to make a set. It's really not getting the right odds. So I think this should just be a fold. Worse yet, he kind of ends up making some comment later on where he gets lucky with ace jack against pocket kings, and really thought he wasn't particularly good for the game. He's wearing headphones. We decided to do a round of straddles. It went 5 straddles to him, and then when it was his turn to straddle, he didn't even end up straddling. Honestly, I hope he listens to this video. I hope he sees it, and I hope he learns something from it. You know, if you're going to be running good, binking some pots, I think you want to be giving back a little bit. If the table decides we're going to do a round of straddles, you should be partaking. So yeah, don't be a nit. Give back to the game. You know, every once in a while when you're running good, it's okay to put in that extra $10. The next interesting hand of note, I actually didn't start recording until it began happening because I just didn't expect it to get this wild and crazy. I hadn't played a hand for quite some time after that ace-7 suited, didn't think that I had a particularly good image, and so now after a few orbits, it folds to the button who limps. He is the guy that's been gambling a ton, and when he limps here, I'm in the small blind. Like I said, the casino takes a higher rake. I'm not going to be limping. I look it down at 10-8 offsuit and make it $30. The big blind, now the one who previously opened in that other hand, makes it 105 fairly quickly. I think he's going to be doing this extremely wide. I just don't believe him. I know that he realizes that I'm going to be attacking this button limp, so I think he's going to be doing it really wide. The button obviously folds, and now I make it $330. He goes into the tank for a really, really long time. I'm obviously sweating it, but I expect that he's going to be jamming or folding. He ends up eventually folding what looks like paint, and we just have to show him the 10-8 offsuit. Not today, buddy. I understand what's going on here, and we're going to keep getting out of line. So pretty happy we obviously got this one through. He ends up making a statement after the hand that he was never calling. It was going to be a jam or a fold. Now in this hand, there is a limp from an older player who is pretty splashy. I opened to 25 with king, queen of diamonds. And then the button, this guy with some goofy, crazy hair, essentially min raises me to $60. Ugh, it's just the worst. He's playing something like a little under 300 behind, and this is a spot where I think I'm just going to be dominated a lot, probably big pocket pairs like aces, kings, ace, king. It's a situation where it's just going to be really hard to continue post-flop. Sometimes I'll flop a queen and get into a spot where I'm just, like I said, facing an overpair. Unfortunately for me, the old man who limped calls the 60. So for 35 more, I'm just never folding. I do make the call once the older gentleman finally puts in the chips. And that's when we are rewarded with a beautiful flop of king, king, 5 with 2 clubs. Pff, what a dream. Obviously in this spot I expect to have the best hand just always, unless somebody has exactly ace king, but I'm just not worried about that. When the old man checks, I decide to lead into the 3-better for $50. I think sometimes he's going to check this back because there are 2 kings on the board, and I don't want a club to come off, slow down the action. So like I said, I bet $50. He snap calls. I expect to have the best hand here just all of the time. The old man thinks for a bit and does eventually make a fold. At this point, I'm just hoping the turn's not a club so that it doesn't scare him from his overpairs. Like I said, I think he's going to have aces or queens here. The turn is a brick. I think it's like an offsuit 8. I decided to check. I kind of want to lay the trap. I think he's just going to bet his pairs here a lot. My hand looks like a flush draw, some smaller pocket pairs, so I think he's going to bet. And sure enough, he does take the bait and ends up betting $100. At this point, he leaves himself with something like 140, so I don't think he's ever going to be folding any pairs. If he does himself have a flush draw like ace, queen of clubs, I think he's going to have to call it off. So I put him all in, and he does pretty reluctantly, but pretty much instantly call it off. I show my hand. The river's a brick. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it's like an offsuit deuce. I know the clubs don't get there. Nothing really gets there, and sure enough, the trip kings are good for the scoop. You know, obviously probably got very lucky here. I think he likely had a hand like maybe exactly pocket aces given his small re-raise pre-flop. And so these are the situations where if the older gentleman didn't fold, I probably wouldn't fold either because it is only $35. But you're just going to end up having to get really, really lucky, like flop trips, make a flush, make a straight. Thankfully, king queen suited is the internet nuts. So sure enough, we did probably crack a big pocket pair. Now, in the next interesting hand of note, I am in the $10 straddle. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few players at the table who are doing it. I think that it's always better for the game if there are more blinds, especially given the rate considerations in these smaller games in California card rooms. There's an early position limp, the button limps, the big blind limps, and with king queen suited, I am going to be putting in a raise here. I make it $60, and sure enough, if people limp, they're oftentimes not going to be folding. All three players do call, and we go 4 ways to a flop, which comes ace, king, 9 with 2 diamonds. Now, once the big blind checks, obviously I could be using my range advantage here to be betting, as I am the one who's going to have aces, kings, and ace-king. I just think the problem here is that I don't have a backdoor flush draw in a 4-way pot. Some of these players do still retain an ace, hands like ace-10 offsuit, those suited wheel aces. So I end up deciding that I'm going to be checking and evaluating. This is a situation where I think oftentimes it can get checked through, and now I can delay c-bet the turn. I end up checking, and the action checks through. The turn is an offsuit jack, and when the big blind once again checks, it's obviously not my favorite turn, but I do block the nuts. I decided that I'm going to be betting half pot. I bet $120. The early position limper does decide to fold after some thought, and then the button ends up jamming for $135, which is about $15 more. Now the player in the big blind goes into the tank. Obviously, I want him to just fold, although I do think that oftentimes now the button that jammed is very likely to have some 2 pairs, maybe even just the nuts exactly with queen 10 offsuit. I'm obviously not going to be folding for $15, but I'd much rather that the player in the big blind fold. As I said, after some thought, he eventually decides that he's going to be folding. I'm going to be putting in the $15 more, hoping to hit that offsuit 10 or possibly a kicker if he happens to have 2 pair. I call. The river is now an offsuit 10. We obviously make the nuts. And he ends up tabling king jack for turning 2 pair. I show the king queen for the river nut straight. Obviously getting very, very lucky there. Now, I think the question here is, do we like how we played the hand? I think checking this flop is perfectly fine. As I said, in a 4-way pot, I don't think we could just be betting an ace-high board with second pair. Now, once the turn is a jack, I think we could actually just check once again. There aren't that many rivers that we have to be scared of. Obviously, we probably don't want to make 2 pair, as someone can have a 10 to make a straight. But other than that exact card, there's probably not many rivers that we're scared of. I don't think that there is anybody that has a flush draw. If they do have a flush draw, they're probably not folding the turn. So yeah, we can get value from flush draws. But other than that, I don't expect much else to call. So I think I actually prefer just checking here and giving someone an opportunity to bet some bluff candidates. Obviously here, if it checks through the button and he jams, he is actually kind of a splashy player, and I might just end up making the call here with the second pair and obviously still getting lucky, but at least we give somebody an opportunity to take a shot at here with worse hands. I think once I bet, it's just very unlikely that I'm going to be getting calls from much worse. In fact, I think the exact hands that I am trying to get called by are hands like 10 jack, Queen Jack, and King 10, which all have gut shots and worse pairs. And if I am trying to get called by those, I should probably actually just be betting smaller. That then brings us to the very next hand when I pick up pocket queens in the big blind. There is an open to $30 in middle position from the player who had rivered the set of deuces earlier. When it folds to me in the big blind, facing a 6x raise, I elect to just call, keep ranges wide. He hasn't been giving anybody any action. He hasn't really been playing any hands, so I don't want to alert him to how strong of a hand I actually have in the big blind. We go heads up to a flop, which comes King 10 for rainbow. I check and he snap checks it back. When he checks back this quickly, I think he does still retain some really strong hands like pocket kings or 10s for a set that are trying to disguise the strength of their hand. The turn is a deuce. I check, and again, he quickly checks. I think when he checks back this turn, now he no longer has any particularly good hands. The river is an 8. Nothing really gets there. At this point, I think I obviously have the best hand here with pocket queens and want to be betting for value. I go into the tank to decide on what sizing I want to go with, and eventually come to the decision that I want to bet $80, over betting the pot, make it look like I don't have anything, try to get called by some ace highs, maybe even some hands like pocket jacks, pocket nines. He goes deep into the tank. Looking back on this, obviously I understand what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make it look like I'm bluffing, but the problem is oftentimes when you overbet the pot and someone has a hand like ace high, which is what it looks like he has, they eventually just decide that the bet is too big and they can find better spots. I will oftentimes level myself in these situations and think, well, if I was bluffing here, I would have to go very large because I wouldn't want to get called by ace high, and so when I'm betting for value, I should do the same, but that just doesn't hold true. I think this would have been a spot to just bet 2/3 pot, try to get called by ace highs. Unfortunately for me, he does make the disciplined fold, and we end up scooping the pot with what is obviously the best hand. In this next hand, we have another straddle pot. I am in fact a straddle with pocket deuces. There are 4 limps. That's right, in today's day and age, still, the whole entire table is limping. I don't know what anybody's doing. The big blind now makes it $35. He is a nice gambler, likes putting in action. I think he's doing this very wide. Obviously, I could be 3-betting to isolate, but with small pocket pairs, I'm trying to go multi-way, flop a set, win a big pot. I call. All the limpers call. We go 6 ways to a flop, which comes 10, 9, deuce with 2 spades. This is exactly what dreams are made of. 6-way hands with bottom set on draw heavy boards. Couldn't have dreamed it up even better. Now the first couple of guys check. The pre-flop raiser checks. It's on me. It's a spot where I should just be betting. After thinking for some bit, I don't know why, but I decided to check. I just thought that I'd disguise the strength of my hand. Perhaps one of the first limpers here is going to have some good hands, some draws. Obviously, the last guy to act is somebody who is very capable of putting in some bluffs. He did it earlier with pocket twos, so I end up checking. The next guy to act checks, and I'm immediately regretting my decision until the last guy quickly bets $125. Oh, what a dream. At least somebody's putting some money into this pot. The button folds. The small blind now calls fairly quickly, leaving himself somewhere between $400 and $500. Now it's on the pre-flop opener, who calls as well, leaving himself with about $650. Obviously, with the action now on me, the question is, how much am I going to be raising? At first glance, the 2 players to my right don't have much left in their stack. The only real player that I have to be worrying about is the player across the table, which has me covered. I have about $1,200, and after some thought, I decide that if I am going to be making a raise here, if I make it something a little more traditional, like $500 or $600, then I'm really committing myself. The player across the table would then be getting a great price if they in fact have a draw. And so after some thought, I decided to just ship it in here. If I have something like a flush draw or straight and flush draw, this is what I'd be doing. I don't really want to be giving anybody a great price to be calling. And so I end up jamming it all in here for about $1,300. The players to my right who did call don't have much left. So if I be raising, I'm putting them all in anyway. And so I have to be concerned about the player across the table from me. I want to be applying maximum pressure. I jam. He ends up making a fold. The player in the small blind folds fairly quickly as well. And now the action is on the pre-flop raiser. He goes into the tank, starts counting off his chips, looking at how much he has. Like I said, it was $650. I assume at this point that it's very likely that he has some sort of draw, maybe a hand like Queen Jack, possibly all of the suited flush combos. He does like raising all sorts of King X and Queen X suited hands, so perhaps he in fact has one of those. He goes in the tank, and after quite some time, he eventually just decides on making a fold. I don't really mind it here. I don't expect that he had an overpair. I think if he had an overpair, he'd probably be raising larger pre-flop. That is something that he does most of the time. In hindsight, I don't really like the way I played this hand. Once the pre-flop aggressor checks, I think I should just be betting here. In fact, I probably got saved that the last person decided to bet this pot because there's obviously a wide variety of turns that I'm not really going to love. And so looking back on the hand, I think I should probably just be betting this flop, something to the tune of 2/3. And then obviously a lot of interesting things could have happened. Perhaps I end up losing this hand. I don't really know, but I think in hindsight, that just would have been a much better play. Once I check and somebody else bets, then I'm just kind of handcuffed to check raising and putting, like I said, maximum pressure on everybody else. We end up scooping this fairly large pot without any resistance. Not much better than picking up $500 without having to see a turn or a river. At this point, the game has really dried up. There aren't many players in the game who are putting in any money poorly, except the action player to my right. He opens, I think, to $25 or $30. I elect to 3-bet pocket sevens and end up winning a pot where the flop comes Queen 9-9. He check calls the flop. We check the turn and the river, and I beat King high. With only a maximum of 1 hour left to play before I have to pick up my kids, these are usually the spots where I have to start making a decision as to whether I want to call it quits early or try to possibly table change and find a better spot. After that hand, there's another limp from the action player. I make it $40 with King Queen suited. It folds to the small blind, who makes it $140. Obviously, I have a good hand, but not one facing a 3-bet. I fold, and he shows pocket jacks. And after that hand, I decide it's time to just call it quits. I book a $683 winner, and we head up to pick up the kids.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. That's all for now. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, please come to Capital Casino this Saturday starting at 2 p.m. for the meetup game with all the other vloggers. And if you haven't yet, head to PokerAgs.com to pick up your sweet check raise Charles merchandise. See you guys in the next video.